The cemetery was quiet that Sunday afternoon. The sky was a pale gray, and the gentle rustle of leaves carried the kind of silence that feels heavier than words. Edward Sterling, a man whose name was printed in business magazines and whispered in Wall Street corridors, walked slowly along the stone path with a bouquet of white lilies in his hand. He was the kind of man people never imagined breaking down: sharp suits, a net worth in the billions, the iron reputation of a CEO who built an empire out of nothing. But here, among rows of granite markers and faded flowers, Edward wasn't the ruthless executive. He was just a widower. A husband who had lost the only person who ever saw the man behind the mask. It had been 3 years since Emily died. 3 years since cancer took away her laughter, her warmth, her grounding presence. And yet, Edward came here every week without fail. No boardroom crisis, no shareholder meeting, no $1 million deal ever kept him away. As he approached her grave, however, he stopped. Someone was already there. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 9 or 10. Her dark hair was tangled, and she wore a faded pink hoodie that looked a size too small. She was sitting cross-legged in the grass, clutching a small stuffed rabbit to her chest. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered something Edward couldn't quite hear. For a moment, Edward just stood there, frozen. Cemeteries weren't places where you expected strangers, especially children. The girl wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and finally noticed him. Startled, she scrambled to her feet. I'm sorry, she said quickly, backing away from the headstone. I didn't mean to. Edward raised a hand gently. It's all right, he said, his voice softer than his usual commanding tone. You don't have to leave. The girl hesitated, biting her lip. She glanced at the grave again before whispering, I was just talking to her. Edward felt a pang in his chest. You knew my wife? The little girl hugged the stuffed rabbit tighter. Not really, but she helped me once. A long time ago. Edward blinked, trying to process her words. Emily had always been the kind of woman who gave without expecting anything in return. Volunteering at shelters, baking for neighbors, paying attention to the people others overlooked. But still, hearing this from a child was unexpected. He knelt down, his expensive suit brushing against the damp grass. What do you mean, sweetheart? How did she help you? The girl's eyes filled with fresh tears. She glanced down at the headstone, tracing Emily's name with her finger. When my mom got sick, we didn't have much money. Sometimes, we didn't even have food. One day, we were at the grocery store, and I remember my mom was crying because she couldn't pay for everything. Your wife, she was there. She paid for us. And she smiled at me. She told me everything would be okay. Her voice cracked. That was the last time my mom smiled before she died. Edward's throat tightened. He had no idea. Emily never told him about this. The girl's small shoulders trembled as she added, so, sometimes I come here, because I don't have anyone else to talk to. She was kind to me, and I miss her, even if I didn't know her well. Edward felt something inside him shatter. This stranger, this little girl, was crying at his wife's grave because Emily had given her one moment of kindness in a world that had clearly been cruel. Where's your dad? Edward asked softly. The girl looked down. I don't have one. It's just me. I live with people who don't really want me there. He understood then. Foster care. A broken system. A child caught in between. Edward had built skyscrapers, closed billion-dollar mergers, and commanded boardrooms filled with men twice his age. But at that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was the trembling child in front of him, clutching a stuffed rabbit like it was the last piece of her world. He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. What's your name? Lila, she said. Edward nodded slowly. Lila, would you like to tell me more about your mom? They sat together in the grass. Lila talked in bursts, sometimes quiet, sometimes rushed, as if afraid the words would disappear if she didn't get them out quickly. She told him about her mother's laugh, how she used to sing while cooking, how she promised things would get better even when her body grew weaker every day. And Edward listened. Really listened. The way Emily used to listen to him when he came home, exhausted and bitter, carrying the weight of the corporate world. The more Lila spoke, the more Edward saw pieces of Emily in her. The resilience, the bravery hidden under vulnerability, the instinct to hold on even when the world kept trying to push you down. Hours slipped away. The gray sky turned to gold, then to purple. The cemetery lights flickered on, one by one. When Lila finally stood, brushing the grass off her knees, she looked at him uncertainly. I should go. If they notice I'm late, they'll be mad. Edward felt a stab of worry. Who's they? Lila hesitated. The family I live with. But it doesn't matter. They don't care where I am most of the time. He clenched his fists, fighting back the anger rising inside him. Emily would never forgive him if he let this child walk away into a cold night and an uncaring home. Wait, he said, pulling a card from his wallet. This has my number. If you ever need anything at all, you call me. Do you understand? Lila frowned at the sleek card, embossed with his company's logo. But, you're rich. Edward almost smiled. And you're important, don't forget that. For the first time that day, Lila's lips curled into the faintest smile. She tucked the card carefully into her pocket and hugged her rabbit tight. Thank you, she whispered before running off into the night. Edward couldn't sleep that night. He kept seeing Lila's tear-streaked face, hearing her tiny voice saying Emily's kindness had given her the last smile she saw from her dying mother. The next morning, Edward walked into his glass tower office, but for once, he wasn't thinking about stock prices or quarterly earnings. He was thinking about a little girl in a pink hoodie. Find out everything you can about Lila, he ordered his assistant, now. It took only a few hours. Foster care records. Placement history. The name of the family she was with. Edward's blood boiled when he saw the reports. Neglect, complaints, but nothing severe enough for the system to pull her out. She had slipped through the cracks, like so many others. He knew then what he had to do. Weeks passed. Edward kept visiting the grave, and so did Lila. Each time, they talked longer. She grew more comfortable, her words less guarded. She told him about school, about how she was always the quiet one in class, about how she hated math but loved to draw. She even brought her sketches one day, little pencil drawings of flowers, birds, and people. Edward praised every one of them, and Lila's eyes lit up like she'd never heard those words before. One afternoon, she asked, "Why do you always bring flowers here?" He smiled faintly. Because Emily loved them. She said flowers remind us that beauty can exist, even when life is short. Lila tilted her head. She sounds like she was really nice. She was, Edward whispered. The best person I ever knew. And in Lila's eyes, he thought he saw Emily again. The day everything changed was a rainy Thursday. Edward was in the middle of a board meeting when his phone buzzed. A small, trembling voice spoke on the other end. Mr. Sterling. It's Lila. I don't know where to go. His heart stopped. Where are you? She was crying. They locked me out. They said I was too much trouble. I'm at the bus stop near the cemetery. Edward didn't wait. He didn't explain. He simply stood up, walked out of the meeting, and drove through the rain until he saw her. Soaked, shivering, clutching her rabbit under the flickering streetlight. When she saw him, she ran straight into his arms. And in that moment, Edward Sterling, the untouchable CEO, the billionaire mogul, made a decision that would change both their lives. He would not let Lila go back. She had found his wife's grave. Now, she would find a home. Edward's lawyers worked relentlessly. The Foster family didn't fight it. If anything, they seemed relieved. The process was complicated, but Edward had resources, influence, and more importantly, determination. Months later, a judge signed the papers. Congratulations, Mr. Sterling, the judge said. Lila is now officially under your guardianship. Lila squeezed his hand so tightly it hurt, but Edward didn't care. For the first time since Emily's death, he felt alive again. Not because he had regained what he lost. He never could, but because he had found someone who needed him as much as he needed them. And Emily, somehow, Edward knew she would be smiling.